us about the future of film. Our special guest today is Brendan Bradley. Thanks for being here, Brendan. Would you like to introduce yourself?
Sure. Thanks for having me. I'm Brendan Bradley. I'm an actor and scrappy storyteller, which is meant working in basically every medium and mode of storytelling, including these medium and modes. I've been traveling with VR live productions for the last 4 years and run several companies and shows within these ecosystems that I love. But I'm actually returning this month mostly to the front lines at Paramount. I'm one of the lot captains coordinating the strike effort for film and television, where I've worked for 17 years in over 100 TV shows, movies, video games, and commercials.
Wow, lots of experience there. Thank you for being
Thanks.
here.
Yeah, exactly. Thanks for being here, Brandon.
Thanks for
Really
having me.
great. Right. So I will jump in here. um, so you are definitely someone from the business. I also worked in the business, television and film, basically myself. And what would you say today, just as a little idea for us people here? What is this thing going on at the moment with the whole strike? So how are people absorbing it? How do you see that? What's happening there?
Well, there's the how much background do you want on the strike versus how much do you want to talk about the emotions and culture around it?
Yeah, I think it's more the feeling, like what do people say? Do they say, well, we have a chance here to pull something off, or what is this main idea at the moment when you go out there talking to them?
I think the main idea when you go out on the front lines is a concept of community and solidarity. At the end of the day, we are looking at, in mass, a group of people that love creating storytelling, love creating movies. Everyone out there is there because they love it. And what we've really seen is an existential moment in our industry where we've looked left, we've looked right, and it seems like most people who create entertainment product, everywhere from the transportation to the scenic design to the writers to the directors to the editors to all of our crew, all of our actors, no one's making a living based off of what was the economic model of this industry established in the 60s that's no longer been honored or facilitated in what we've called new media.
Right. So it's
Uh,
probably the big change going on. Go on, John.
No, I was going to say that's definitely I think something of concern is that people are not making a living as it is, and this is something we'll talk about in a little bit. But it seems like these studios, at least from my perspective, are trying to drain the last little bit from everyone that they can. So anyway.
I
Well,
mean, I
I
think
think
it's.
just to
Go ahead.
no,
Go
go
ahead,
for it.
Brennan.
Go for it.
No, go ahead,
No,
Brennan.
please.
No, you.
No, you all have the panel, please.
No, I want to hear your comment on it because I could talk on as well as when I would doing acting, and yes, all the credits, been on a lot of things. The thing people don't realize out there is most people, this is a secondary job, as I'd be an agent. And then when I wasn't being an agent, I would, need to take off because I'm going to be on set for a couple days. And, to be creative, you need to really keep a flexibility in your life and almost have a job that's going to give you that flexibility that you can still put energy into being creative. So it's a lot of sacrifice that I think that most people don't realize that people go through.
So, Brendan, can you give us on the slide behind you? We talk a little bit about the history of this and some of the past strikes. Can you give us a little bit of background on, what the Guild is about and exactly what's happening here?
Sure. The TLDR basically is that there's the Writers Guild of America that represents the writers that are currently on strike. And then there's SAG-AFTRA, which is originally two different unions, SAG, the Screen Actors Guild, and AFTRA, the American Federation of Television Radio Artists, that actually in around 2012 had to merge for their own existence to be able to sustain some of these first transitions. and basically these first contract negotiations. These unions rarely strike, actually. They're very strike averse. They do try to kind of go along to get along and try to, at the end of the day, just make a living. And they actually have not struck together since 1960, which was the entire foundation of not only the residual model or the royalty model that's baked into entertainment, but also the healthcare benefits that both the writers and the actors enjoy today. So we got healthcare because we struck in 1960 together. And this, I believe, is also one of these existential moments. But the strike also didn't come out of the blue. We have about over 100 contracts that are negotiated on 3-year cycles for the different types of entertainment product in the marketplace. And this is on schedule every 3 years. We know the time and the date. We're going to sit down with producers and negotiate these contracts. And everyone has years and months to prepare ahead of time. They're called plenary sessions, where members come and bring their grievances about the different contracts. And we say, well, that sucks, but that's not going to be something we're able to negotiate in this cycle. Or, oh, that's a valid point. We're hearing that a lot from membership. Let's take that up to committee. And in this particular instance, for both the writers and the screen actors, at this current moment, the AMPTP, which is the negotiating body for the producers, are actively not sitting down across the table to negotiate. So this is not necessarily an issue of, oh, we just don't like the contract, boo-hoo. This is, we are supposed to be scheduled to engage in negotiations. This is something that happens every 3 years. And one of these parties is actively not negotiating, is not even counter-offering, is not sitting across the table, investing in this process that is the process we all have to go through to be able to work together to create the product that consumers love.
Wow.
Right. Well, thank you for that. I'm going to jump to the next slide here because I think it does bring up the present situation and, exactly what's going on. We've tried to bullet some of these issues, but you may want to speak to them as well if you'd like.
Let me pull up the slide.
That's
secondary
the specific issues. I think one in particular that has come up is AI, for example, and
Sure.
protections against being cloned, so to speak, and not getting residuals for that. And
Well, I think AI is
a
AI always is a hot button issue, but I think it really comes down to there's two things when we talk about AI. There's the tool and there's the culture. And the tool is integrated into almost every part of our daily lives right now. We're talking about just querying large data sets, which has remarkable application, both generative and non-generative.
Right.
However, the culture of AI, for some reason, and this is so strange because I don't actually know what it's based in, is this belief that people don't own their underlying data. And that's not just actors and creators and artists. But we're not talking about Midjourney because David hand drew a bunch of stuff and ingested it in a data set. We're talking about it because $70 million worth of IP was ingested into it that is now being leveraged without consent, without credit, without compensation. And I think the larger existential question, if you truly love AI, which I think it's actually a remarkable tool, I love developers, I love some of the applications being built within it. But if you truly are an advocate for AI, you understand that not only did we need the original data set to build these tools and leverage these tools, we're going to continue to need new data to continually hone and refine and evolve these ecosystems. Well, then that has to begin with a conversation of where do we get that data from? Whose data is that? What rights do they have regarding that data? And that's everyday average users. And I think that all of us right now, not just in the entertainment industry, but we get to be possessive. Jared Lanier has the Data Dignity campaign. These ideas of what is ours, what rights do we have, and what rights should we have going forward? And if we're going to build multi-trillion-dollar tools off of other people's data, we have a clear precedent for them being able to properly compensate and credit people for the use of that valuable property. So I would actually argue that my data as a performer or as a writer is actually more valuable in an AI system than it is normally, because when I write a script or when I act in a movie, that's a single deliverable. But if it can be generated exponentially, that's exponential value. I should be paid more if it's going to be trained in a data set, if it's going to have unlimited output. And so we're just having a common sense conversation. And where this comes down to, again, I don't think there's winners or losers in the strike. I think that we're building the runway for what is going to be the future viability of these industries. And when we look at AI specifically, I don't hear anyone at Disney or at Netflix or at Marvel taking the position that once their data or their IP is ingested into a data set, that they lose their copyright. And I think that they should maintain their copyright because that's the whole valuable exchange of IP. That's what the entire entertainment industry and technology industry is built on, is the licensing of valuable IP. And so if we start diminishing the rights of all IP holders, we diminish the rights of these very companies. And I don't want that. I want sustainable industries because unsustainable systems don't sustain. And so I think this is a moment where in some ways, ironically, the artists are protecting us from our kind of worst instincts of just trying to do something because it's cool and because we can, not because we should, and not thinking about what that runway looks like in 10 years for a sustainable industry. And all this comes back to, all of us could have told you in early YouTube culture, I'm sure there's a lot of people in this room that were encoding and ingesting early streaming video on their own websites. We all knew at the time the monetization path wasn't great. There was real-time tracking we could do on the viewership and on the analytics of those users. But we all believed and knew unlimited free content was not sustainable as a business model. There was no world in which you were going to pay $15 a month and have unlimited content. So it was a weird thing to have represented from the beginning. And now we're seeing the shoe drop on the other side of that. And all we're talking about when it comes to then AI specifically is, hey, let's not do the same thing where we knowingly misrepresent a business model and then try to call an oopsie in 10 years. Let's just enter this with our eyes open and do something that makes sense for everybody.
Wow.
No, you're so right. You're so right. Yeah. I mean,
Definitely.
Chris.
So, yeah. Is there something like I don't want to say master plan or something like when it comes to AI, and you said that very well, like every time someone is creating an art piece or making a performance or whatever, this is something that you delivered to a producer or your audience, whatever, and now it's getting saved somewhere, and maybe parts of that will be taken out by an AI model, and it will use parts of that and combine it with something else or whatever. So is there any kind of rules that you already worked out, like something that you can present to, let's say, OpenAI or Facebook and all the big players, that you can say, we want something like, I remember that in Germany, I'm in Berlin, we had something in the times of VHS tapes. On each VHS tape that you bought, there was some pennies or whatever going to the right holders because you were able to record something from television, for example. And so to make clear that everyone gets a share because you could copy whatever kind of stuff, they had some bucks on each VHS tape that was going to copyright holders, for example. Do we have a similar plan or something in this direction? Is there something concrete?
So there's nothing concrete because what we're there to do right now is sit down across the table and in good faith negotiate something that works for everybody. We're not having that dialogue because we're not allowed to have that dialogue. However, to your point about VHS and home box office, all of these contracts, these over 100 contracts that the union has for different types of product, they really all come down to a very boring application of use and reuse. And you just ask yourself, is this the intended use of the original contract for which a base salary was compensated? Or is this a reuse of that original content? Or is this a brand new use, which then requires a brand new contract? And so I think we can look at a variety of our existing contracts And there is a lot of very compelling language. For example, my belief would be, and again, I'm not on the negotiating committee. No one's asking my opinion about this. But if we look at what we have existing, there's commercials that air on television. We remember those.
Yeah.
And the idea of a commercial contract is it's on a 13-week cycle. And the idea is that they basically have to pay for the right to continue to even own the commercial and use the commercial. And then they can air it as many times as they want based off of their own market decisions. And then they pay a reuse fee based off of the actual airing. I think there's compelling precedent here to suggest that if you want to include someone's data in a data set, that there's an initial 13-week cycle purchase for having those rights. And then it's very clean, right? You either made the payment or you didn't. I should either be in that data set or my data should not. There's no in between. There's no gray area on that. And then based off of what's generated off of it, working out some sort of a participation based off of that. That's, I think, the closest we have to existing language that might skin onto how we know AI works. And again, I want everyone to close their eyes and imagine, I just wish we had some sort of transparent open ledger technology that could in real time track the usage of data and transmit. It sounds very complicated and weird, but I've got to believe that someone's figured it out.
But one of the things, though, to your point, is that it gets very complicated because, mentioning David and Midjourney and all of that is, Midjourney users that pay for the Pro account, for example, are actually paying for the privilege of allowing Midjourney to continue to train their model on the images that we are paying to generate, which is also an interesting topic, but slightly off subject here. But go ahead, Chris.
Just also for the understanding of our viewers in this case, I think it's quite important to mention that sure, you're generating new images and you're paying for generating new images, and those images are training the model to know if something was well intended or not, like is that a good creation or a bad creation. But I think we are more probably talking about the base data when an AI model is trained with images and things. You have to start somewhere, and the starting point basically is, what did you say, $70 million of footage, or what was it exactly?
Well, that's just one of the many lawsuits that are being brought against them. So there's the whole Getty lawsuit that's for much more than that. But there's a specific artist community just in the UK that has a class action lawsuit for $70 million for their IP being used in the system unethically.
Right.
Like,
could be billions.
Oh, it's probably more than that.
Yeah,
so
but there's a flaw in all of these lawsuits, and so far they've all failed because of the flaw. But I think we should really.
What is the flaw?
The flaw is that when the data is created, it's basically stripped down, and so if I get an image from a stock library, for example, I should pay for it because I'm using that full image. But should I be paying for the suggestion of what an image looks like? This is a whole, I think, separate debate that we can get into.
It is an exact separate debate. So where I want to go with this is this, though. This is based on what you were saying. The thing that's resonating with me the most as far as owned footage that a lot of people willingly upload to these social media platforms, to YouTube. I was one of the early entry people in 2009, and handily just uploading footage, even being part of the union, and you're waiving all of your, you signed this crazy long disclosure at the end that they own the stuff and that you don't really got to get paid. And what about all these hours that, let's face it, this is Google, it's YouTube, but it's Google that owns all of this stuff. And I don't know, like, where does, a lot of people are creating just because they want to create and they are not being compensated at all. These are not even the union people. So yeah, I mean, obviously I think this is a huge thing as somebody who's created hundreds of videos on YouTube, and I'm yet to see monetization because for whatever reasons, it's very interesting.
Well, I think this is a good segue to our next slide, slide number 4. So I'm just going to bring it up on the screen here because some people are being, are actually making out like bandits on the backs of, writers and artists and everyone else that's creating. I mean, it's sad, very sad.
Well, I think that, and this is the complicated conversation of any entertainment product, and this is the history of all entertainment, right? We always talk about starving artists, like that is a common expression. But what's ironic is then when it gets in negotiations, all we seem to talk about in the media is the very few millionaires that work in the industry. And to me, it's you've got to hold space for both. To your point, yes, many of us have just uploaded our creations, and that democratization of content is very exciting. For you to create your own work and bring to life your own story, that is the ultimate promise of these storytelling tools. And it's incredible. It's very exciting. It's very inspiring, so long as that you yourself are not being predatory about that. I can waste my time, and I have and will, for thousands of hours for a labor of love. That's perfectly reasonable. It's when I start doing that with other people's time and work that they didn't consent to that, and they should get to consent to that. But secondarily, just because you donated your time to create a work of art does not mean it does not have value. And all art, all work, all creations have value. And when they become productized, whatever that means to whatever company is distributing or exhibiting them, so whether that is creating an AI tool that is breaking down those components to then monetize the ability to generatively create new things, or whether that is taking a YouTube video and then distributing it somewhere else or running ads against it, once that becomes productized and monetized, you should participate in that. If there was value to you culturally to create something, and now it has value monetarily, you should merely participate in that monetary stream. And I don't think that that should be perceived as a controversial point by anybody, because the conversation isn't to deny these companies the ability to productize and monetize. It's merely then to allow the very creators of those products to participate in the value they create.
100%.
Yeah, absolutely.
Excellent point. Excellent point. I mean, I think, no one's saying that capitalism shouldn't exist, that people shouldn't make money, but everyone should be compensated fairly. And, if you have one person that's walking away with the bank, then I don't think that's fair.
Well, and can I be snarky about that for a moment?
Yeah.
Because I do think we get into this conversation of like, well, that's capitalism. And the conversation is, well, is it? Because there are ways in which capitalism is true, and there are ways in which capitalism is actually then somewhat distorted. And the idea of making margins or making profit based off of means of production, that is a societal system that we have all, whether or not opted into or not. I didn't see the opt-out button, but that is the system that we're within. But what's weird is when we look specifically at these technological companies, we are looking at a pattern, whether it's WeWork or Theranos or Uber, or now some of these AI systems, or even some of these streaming platforms. Netflix, in many ways, was able to light money on fire and not actually be a profitable business model for so many years because of this idea of venture capital and investment and valuation. The company was the product. The valuation was the product, not actually the underlying entertainment product they were creating and distributing. And I think that's where in some ways the conversation in capitalism gets a little dangerous, is when we're no longer actually talking about the common sense methods of how do you treat workers to be able to create a product, to be able to then attract consumers, to be able to sell that product. When we're talking about actually the product being the idea of the value of the company, I think we get further and further away from the needs of the consumer, the needs of society, the needs of the laborer, and even the very needs of the economic model.
No, you're
100%.
very right there, and we put labels on things, and at least Marx, when he defined communism, basically said that this is a system that needs to be refined and built. With capitalism, I think there's a lot of people that just think that it's here and that's it. But what you said is so important. We need to move forward from some of these old ideas that we're so locked into and have labeled as such, and that's part of the problem, I think, is that we refuse to acknowledge the fact that there is a need for change. So thank you for that. Yeah.
Yeah,
If I can-
and I think it's, go ahead, Brent.
No, go for it.
The only thing I wanted to add is I think it's very interesting that the producers are not wanting to come to the table yet. They're strategizing on their own, because they're not sitting around doing nothing. They are definitely doing something, and I definitely think that they are not participating in the conversation. Go ahead with your.
Sure. I just think the other side of that, so that it doesn't sound like it's all doom and gloom. I think that the dialogue we're having right now, in the absence of the dialogue that is supposed to be happening between the AMPTP and the unions, we as a society are starting to have this dialogue in public, which I think is really remarkable and really important. And what I'm seeing is, so the captain system at SAG-AFTRA did not exist a month ago. We didn't have a way to mobilize as a union because, like I said, we were rather strike averse. And so we are seeing a period of time of union literacy, of advocacy, of community, that I think is what will champion the next generation. And we're seeing that similar labor movement across the entire nation with hot labor summer of multiple different industries saying this has gotten to a point that we've given everything we can give. You've actually bled the worker as dry as the worker can go. And now we're at a point that it just needs to make sense. We've got to have a sustainable system here because unsustainable systems don't sustain. And we could go along with it for another 3 years, another 5 years, another 10 years, but then there won't be an industry. And at the end of the day, we should all be in agreement that we want the viability of these multiple industries because the economy is people. And so if you don't have American workers that are able to make a living wage to make American products, I don't know how anyone is expecting that they're going to be able to buy American products.
Good point. Exactly.
Definitely. I would be interested in, from your point of view, or maybe also from the point of view of
Goodbye. Just check out the plant real fast. Should we all go?
Yeah, exactly.
It's an advertising break brought to you by Home and Garden.
For example. Right. We just need to collect the money from them. No, talking about the industry. In my opinion, I mean, I was starting in the industry. That was 1992 when I was starting to study filmmaking and post-production at that time here in Babelsberg Studios, and a lot has changed since that time. I was somehow lucky to be able to be part of movies that were done the very old-fashioned way with film material, and they did a lot here on the studios in a very old-fashioned way because it was East Germany that was just reunited with West Germany and stuff. But it was interesting to learn all the old techniques and going into the digital era, let's say. So I guess that the industry itself is quite old already, and it went through a lot of changes. Would you agree to say that the industry anyways will change drastically in the next years, just by technology and by the pure speed of production that will come up now with, for example, AI? And AI is not just generating the whole image. It can also be speeding up the process in visual effects and creating costume designs and scenography and all that stuff in the end. Like, don't you see, or would you say, okay, well, we will have a complete different type of industry in the next 5 years? And is there a vision where you guys say, I mean, getting your share, I mean, that must be clear. Yes, definitely. Everyone who's contributing must get a share of the money that is made out of that. But how do you see the industry coming up? And how do people work there in the future? Is there vision somehow out there?
I mean, I think there's a variety of different visions. I think that I have a rather controversial opinion on this because I actually think that we should stay away from the word new or different, because ultimately what we're talking about is thousands of year tradition of storytelling. Humans love stories. They love storytelling. We've gathered around the campfire. And at one point in
Definitely.
time, when we looked at shamanism, we look at text, literally just the ability to have text was technology. That was the tool of the day.
Sure,
And
sure.
there will always be technological improvements, technological tools, technological advancements. These all just become part of the artist palette to tell stories. And these are all decisions of what is the best medium or mode for telling stories. But my return to virtual reality specifically and traveling shows all over the world, both virtually and physically, to be able to bring these stories to life in new, heightened, magical ways, I find more and more I'm returning to the original crafts of mask work, pose, staging, light, sound. Because as good as the technology gets, it is still rooted in this principle of human storytelling and connectivity and intimacy. And to that point, I think that there's a temptation to think that faster is better. That, oh, well, we're just going to create. I think the idea that more people can leverage the tools is a good thing. But I don't know that I've seen compelling data that we just want fast content. We ultimately want thoughtful content. And in an era of unlimited on-demand content, we've actually seen a greater return to appointment-driven experiences like live events, live concerts, in-person experiences, hybrid experiences. Because in some ways, what we are craving is the connection and the thoughtfulness, and art has always been two important dialogues. There is the dialogue between the artist and the instrument or the technician, basically, and that could be my physical instrument is my technical ability, or it could be I'm playing an instrument, it could be I'm painting, it could be I'm puppeting a digital system. It could be that you're leveraging a visual effect tool. But that's the dialogue for the artist and the creation, and we enjoy that. Some of us, we like to see behind the scenes of that. We like to watch that work transpire because that's exciting to see that craft brought to life, that passion, that energy, that talent. But then there's the dialogue from the artist and the audience. And I think the most exciting part of these technological tools is that we're closing the gap between that dialogue and that we're getting more immediate feedback and conversation and chorus and sometimes co-creation with our art, with our audience, which to me is the most exciting potential of these tools. But I think that when we talk about trying to just pipeline and push out a funnel of content, the more we get away from its intention, which is storytelling content is ultimately first and foremost an act of creation, thoughtful creation and intention between the artist and their technical ability. And then it is a thoughtful, invited dialogue with an audience. And if we're just, and that in some ways I think captures the water cooler effect. And that what we really love most about stories is, oh my gosh, did you see that? Did you see that movie? Now we get to talk about it and we get to share a human experience. And if I can sit there and type in a prompt and generate a movie that let's just throw all the consensual, unethical data side of it out. Let's just say somehow that was all ethically done and the revenue model worked and it was all perfect. I still watched that in isolation. It was not ultimately created for me. There was no craft that went into building or designing that. There's no human flaw, no biological filter to that human experience. And I'm not sharing it with anybody. So I'm also missing out on that dialogue that I don't actually have a connection. You know, if I render Tom Cruise didn't actually perform that crazy. He didn't moon jump for me, you know,
Right,
for us to go, that's Tom. He did that. That's crazy.
Yeah, definitely.
And, you know, if it just got rendered for me, that work wasn't being done by the artist for me. I'm not watching that work get performed. And I then can't share it with others, which I think then denies the entire purpose of storytelling content.
Right,
Yeah,
but
that's
you know,
that's exactly.
why would you? Sorry, Chris. I mean, you know, why? I mean, why does Tom Cruise even have to be in the equation here? I mean, it's like, shouldn't
Because he loves
storytelling
making
be
movies.
original? No, but if you're putting together, you know, a story, why are we pulling characters that exist? And I mean, as you say, there's copyright issues. There's all kinds of issues. Why not create new characters?
Well, but who creates the new characters?
Well, I think that's part of what's happening here is the ability to actually create characters virtually.
But are you?
And am I? Yeah, I am. Sure.
We're three
Ah.
different. We're a bunch of characters right here in this room right here.
but-
Like
so-
everything that you're talking about with this experience, we're kind of experiencing right now. Look at this. This is a talk show that's being filmed in the metaverse with different characters.
Yeah, but those characters are people, Eric. I think that's exactly the point, right? We are humans. Like for example, Tom Cruise is a human being, and I would definitely agree here that art is always, in our definition at least, made by human beings, and they, as you already said, deliver something, a piece, an action, whatever, and it's just art. If a human did that, if we could easily recreate pictures from Picasso with artificial intelligence model, but no one would pay a lot of money for it because it's not Pablo Picasso who did
Yeah.
that, and it's art because Pablo Picasso was a human being with ideas. He shaped that type of art style that he did, and so on and so on. That's the value in this, right? Not there for me is the big difference, like thinking about recreation of content and the new creation of content.
But
And for
how
all the
about-
people,
Go ahead.
just one point that is important in my opinion, that we have a lot of people in the industry working just on recreation of things, because let's say someone who's working on a commercial for BMW gets said, well, we have this car, please make a 3D model out of that and animate it, go somewhere. There is artwork inside of that for sure, but a lot of the things were already done. You're reproducing a lot of that stuff in the end. It's not your original work of art when you're modeling a car that already exists. You're remodeling something and so on and so on. So there is a lot of work that will be different now, in my opinion, because of the fact that it can be mimicked by artificial intelligence.
Right, but as far as like creating an experience, I feel like from what he was, from what Brennan was talking about, let's say filming a show. Now all of a sudden, in this medium that we can film here in the metaverse, you could create it to where now you get your, featured extras or other roles. You could just have people pop in and then they could be interacting with the main character and creating their own experience based on these things that are happening. And to me, like when we're talking about owning where your likeness will go and then to be able to create it, and now we're all a character that gets to interact with this stuff. I mean, that to me is part of the power of the future with where we're going with how this will be all broken down.
I saw the camera move to me, but I didn't hear a question.
Yeah, we were waiting on pins and needles to hear what you were going to say today.
Well, so let me capture that for a second, because that pins and needles, I think, is the magic. That's the secret sauce. It's tension.
Yeah.
You all wanted me to come sit on this fake couch because we don't know what's going to happen. Because we don't know what's going to happen. And that tension, that uncertainty, is that awkwardness is fundamentally human. And I think that what I so appreciate thus far, and I know that we've heavily weighted on the AI conversation, there's actually much more boring issues that the strike is really ultimately about, which is just basic wage to keep up with cost of living and things like that. But the Copyright Office has already given original guidance on that human authorship is what can be copywritten, that it requires a human actor,
Right.
because that is fundamentally what is being invented or created. And I think where I find that so interesting is that, again, I'm performing live virtual reality as a live actor all over the world. And yes, we're still working through this very limited digital system. But the secret sauce when you come out the other side of one of those shows is the first thing that someone in a technology-only mindset will ask you is, well, couldn't that just be AI? Couldn't you just have predetermined responses that the audience clicks on and goes through the story? And yet, every single person that is an audience member that takes that headset off with tears in their eyes, having connected with me, because no show is the same, because I'm a human. I know what they're going through. We're going to go on this journey together, and I'm going to respond very subtly based off of my own humanity to their encountering of that experience, which is something that, look, maybe 10, 20, 30 years from now, the algorithm will be good enough to detect that, but we ain't there yet. And so throwing out the value of this whole existing industry, economy, and artistry in hopes for a model that is not here yet, to me just feels like a false equivalency and a really deep, a dangerous binary to make. And what we're seeing, bringing it back to the strike, is an example in history of where we did that with streaming. We assumed good faith on a model that did not work, that was not true. And now we're hearing these institutions say, well, we're not making as much money as we used to with television. And it's like, well, then why'd you do it? Then why did you throw out a money printing machine that was working so well for a model that now you're decrying doesn't work at all? Why did we all consent? Well, a lot of us didn't consent to that, but why was that the model we chose? And I think it begins at conversations like this, where I don't mean to be poo-poo Prentice Bradley, but in some ways, if we allow for this space of treating these things as equals before one of them has actually caught up, we can talk about the potential of something all day, but we can also talk about the potential of pure live performance without any mediation, if we're going to just do hypothetics.
Yeah. I think that would create some of the honestly most interesting content. I feel like as we've seen from years in the recent time, these actors, especially with comedy, they'll deliver the line that they had to deliver, and then they'll do some takes that are completely improv. And some of those are the absolute best content that's being created. And for actors to go in, I even being in an acting class, you may be only given a motivation in who your character is, and then you go in and you have to listen to that other person because you don't know that line that they're going to say, and it really, it's like a whole nother level of acting.
Sure. Well, and I would argue that the best content we've experienced during this interview today is when you accidentally stood up and went to the tree, right? Which was total human error. But it's delicious, delightful human error, which is really what we're looking for. Chris, you were talking about, I just completed a film that actually returned to some of those old cinematic techniques. They wanted to shoot very Kubrick style. So everything was in camera.
Okay.
And
cool.
Watching somebody, there was creature makeup, for example, and watching this woman for 8 hours sit in makeup and be transformed, or watching them practically rig the house so that things would move like a haunted house. The magic of that, right? You feel like a child again, that wonderment. That's why we create art. That's why we tell stories. You referenced Picasso. What we like in Picasso is not necessarily a straight, perfect line. We like knowing that those are Picasso's brushstrokes. Those are the glitches in his wrist. And in some ways, the fact that all of us see that skybox as a different color blue because of the way the cones in our eyes work, that's what makes art. And I think that we always just want to hold people handcuff people slightly to that intention, because I think we get a little far afield when we just start talking about the potential of unlimited scalability of art. Because then we're really talking about like posters.com.
Well, actually, like what I think, like to play on the Picasso painting, in future times, I see with especially the metaverse to be able to go into the painting and not just look at the painting, but now it's like that's where the future is going. You're able to go into these worlds and be a part of it and explore it. So now it's not just this Picasso painting, but it's like, okay, to go in and experience it and how that would be imagined. Now we're taking it to a whole nother level of reimagining. And now that maybe does create some additional value for that piece.
Right. So I think we should also move on a little bit.
Yeah.
Because we still have, we have about 15 minutes to go. When we think about this, all these things to come in the future, I mean, for you, as I understood now, you're a person who is adopting new technologies probably quite fast, I would say, because as you said, you're performing in the metaverse. So you were definitely open for that, and as I could hear, you are definitely for a direct interaction with the people. So it sounds to me a little bit like the new theater somehow. Is that correct? Do you think
Sure.
that we have complete new types of not industries but new fields that can offer for a lot of people that may not have the chance to work in the classic movie scene? Do you see a big chance to get a lot of people in there into the new fields?
Well, I think that it all depends on the word new. For example, so I founded the Innovation Lab at New York University's Tisch School of the Arts. And I don't consider it necessarily new technologies, but simply putting a 21st century approach to creative arts training. And it just becomes a conversation of what are the storytelling tools available to you. And then not so much worrying about how that's new or different, but how that simply enhances and expands our existing repertoire of storytelling modalities, and methods. And so I think that when you talk about virtual technologies, for example, yes, that allows for more global partnership and more global collaboration synchronously and asynchronously. So that's very exciting. I mean, since the advent of digital video, especially ubiquitous digital video with us all having a camera in our pockets, the idea that I could start collaborating with other artists around the world or reaching audiences around the world was fantastic and fascinating and inspiring. I remember the first video I ever posted online was a trailer for a play I was doing in New York. And more people watched the trailer the first night that I hosted it than could have fit in the theater that we were producing it. And that access to a global audience was very exciting. And during COVID, of course, we saw every theater in the world thought they had discovered the web series and suddenly could reach larger audiences and was very excited by this. So if that's how we define new, sure, that there are going to be different tools that expand what we're already doing in these fields and enhance what we're doing in some of these fields, and that we can have more global partnership. However, I think also there will be, with every different technique. So, for example, when the red camera came along and kind of disrupted some filmmaking, it actually created a bit of a renaissance for some camera loaders, because some of the techniques you needed to process film were actually similar enough to how you needed to kind of ingest this media that if they could learn the DIT, the technician standards, they could basically still be responsible for the film reels, still be responsible for the footage. And so I think it'll just become, how do you take your knowledge and your craft and your ability and apply some of these new tools to it?
Well said.
Definitely, finding the structure, that is for sure.
As Chris said, we are running out of time, so I'm going to just bring up a slide here that I think follows the point that you just brought up, and that is the ability for people, and you brought up the fact that people can now start producing their own content, possibly a professional level. And Tangerine was produced on an iPhone.
An iPhone, yeah.
Yeah, I mean, it's just pretty amazing. And, I mean, the reason that this has come up is that, and you've probably heard of it, is that there's a movement called Film 3, which I personally believe, should be, or should acknowledge the third film movement, because in some ways it's similar, looking for decentralization and things like that. Do you have any comments on Film 3 and this ability of people to get away from Hollywood to actually start producing independently and distributing independently?
Sure. I mean, I think that there are parts there. I think that Film 3 is kind of like the term immersive or interactive. I think a lot of different communities have used it differently, but I think at its core tenet of decentralizing filmmaking, I think there's pros and cons to that. For example, I don't think Hollywood as a idea is necessarily a villain here. There is the commercialization of entertainment and film property that will always exist. There will be some body that is kind of responsible for a pipeline of a certain type of content to a certain type of consumer base. Now, I come from the very experimental avant-garde theater world, and then through that, the very independent film world. And I think Film 3 as a response to what I would call, honestly, the Netflixification of content distribution, because there was a robust independent film economy up until about 2016, at which time what were traditionally film markets, where you could take an independent film and sell it to France and sell it to Germany and sell it to China, once you could toggle a switch and have content that was on a platform be available in all of these geolocations without dealing with the sublicensing and the distributors of those territories, we disrupted not only the global independent film economy of being able to take film out, but also those companies in each country were the facilitators and the financiers of localized independent film storytelling content. So those artists and those stories suffered because they didn't have access to the revenue base. And we see this, I think it's in Denmark, that wants 5% of their customers' Netflix accounts, that money to go to the local film initiative to be able to restore some of this financing.
Yeah. Right.
Now, again, I kind of jokingly reference the idea of a transparent ledger. If only we had such a technology. I looked at in 2015 what I call D movies, as kind of a nod to the fact that people have called my independent movies poorly produced and poorly, budgeted. So it's not even a B movie. But the idea of being able to distribute them without a distribution label. And I look at, for example, communities like BitTorrent that host a variety of content sharing and peer-to-peer sharing. And we have these networks like the Theta network that has this ability to break up pieces of content so that it can still be encrypted and can be protected, can be hosted across a variety of its users. And you could, in some ways, you could turn everyday users into the seed distributors of the content. And then therefore they could participate in the revenue stream that they are creating by hosting the content. And you could actually then, right next to each other, you could have the pirated version of Batman, and then you could have the monetized or the tokenized version of Batman. Well, over time, there will always be piracy. There will always be some bad faith. But I've got to believe that human greed will do its best and do its work. And people will say, well, shucks, if I host the monetized or the tokenized version of the content on my computer to seed out into the ecosystem for peer-to-peer sharing, I get a small transaction on every download. that I help
Mm.
seed. So now
Yeah.
it makes sense for me to want to protect the copyright of the rights holders because I'm going to participate as a distributor in the distribution of that content. And I mentioned BitTorrent because it's the largest active users in the world, and it was bought by Justin
Right.
Sun with Tron. There is already a wallet integration to be able to start saying, could we allow independent creators upload that first base version of the content that then other people download to seed, and everybody then on a smart contract participates in the transaction of that content.
Oh, very, very cool. You know, and Brendan,
Very
we
interesting.
probably need to get you on here again. You know, as we do a 5-part series or something. You're extremely knowledgeable, but unfortunately, we're running out of time. And, you know, I'd love for you to tell people that are viewing this, that are here, where they can see your work that you've talked about.
Sure. I'm Brendan A. Bradley, all of the places. So please check me out on whatever social media you use. And then currently I perform live in virtual reality. I work a lot with Ferryman Collective. So that's in VR chat. You come, I'm a live actor performing multiple characters opposite you. I have a live stage show called NPC, and I run Onboard XR, which is an open incubator for any artist in the world to bring their first virtual reality production to life. So find out more at onboardxr.org.
Exciting stuff.
Awesome.
Definitely, definitely. Any
Excellent.
closing comments, Chris, Eric?
Yeah, that was
Yeah.
inspiring. It was great to hear your points, and I'm really happy that you joined us. And yeah, would be great to have you back.
Definitely. Lots to speak about. Eric?
I agree, and thank you, because I've been curious to know like what's actually going on the main lines, because obviously New York and LA are the only people actively like participating. I'm over here in Michigan, so I am grateful for all of you that are out there doing the work to make sure that everybody is going to be taken care of properly. And this was some amazing insight that you shared with us, and I am grateful to see kind of what's going to happen as well. And as you said, Brendan, you know, even with this Web3, like to me, what is the future? Where is it going to go? You know, is this the new YouTube that comes up and everybody takes all of their content down from these other places and puts it somewhere else because they're not, who knows what the future holds, but I love talking about these possibilities. So thank you so much.
Great. If
Yeah.
one more plug for everybody who's not in New York or LA and can't come out to a picket line, one of the biggest ways you can support is the FTC actually is receiving comments right now about antitrust laws and about breaking up some of these vertical integrations of these major companies. So you can please fill out those comments, because the more stories they hear, the more they hear that this is harmful to both laborers and consumers. That's incredibly helpful to everyone's cause in pretty much every industry. And to wrap this up, I also want to make sure I go check out this tree because it seemed very exciting.
Well, thank you
Definitely.
very much. This is the Virtual Film Company, and we broadcast every week here on Spatial. Please check out our YouTube channel at Virtual Film Company. We also have a Facebook page. We also have a LinkedIn page, and this has been really wonderful. Thanks to Mystery, Chris, Brendan, and of course our wonderful videographer, Carlos Austin Video Productions. Thank you. Have a
Yeah.
great week, everyone.
I also,
Thanks a lot, guys.
Brendan, I wanted to comment, you have great taste in glasses as well. I think that we're
Right.
having a virtual
Twins.
experience here.
You should check out, if you want these in real life, there's a company called Ox Drip that makes these.
Oh, excellent.
Awesome.
Bye.
See you next week.
Wonderful. Thank
Bye-bye,
you.
guys.
Thank
I'm
you,
off to
everyone.
SIGGRAPH to
Thank you.
perform live virtual reality.